Victoria 3 has gotten a huge update a little while ago, and it has been received with a really bad reception. The feedback the community has given here goes from the general state of the patch all the way to the specifics of the naval system that came with the update. So it's not just small complaints or a narrow review bombing issue. We are looking at a patch that, at the very least, simply came out before it was ready to leave the oven. And frankly, I misread this as well. I assumed it would be in a better state on release. To be honest with you, the Victoria 3 team and many other Paradox teams traditionally have cut it very close with releases. So close in fact that the pre-release version content creators get was often a totally different beast from what would actually release. Now, in the past, Victoria 3 in particular actually got the job done right before release, but that very obviously wasn't the case here. The update was plagued by performance issues initially, but what now still remains is that the AI is far from the best at using the naval system. This is so true that, in fact, the game director Martin Unward has issued a statement declaring that they will be doing an AI patch addressing the weaknesses of the AI going forward. This patch goes far beyond just the naval issues, but is definitely needed nonetheless. In this video, I want to focus on the most substantial changes the update has made to the game, the Navy. And I want to be very clear here about what the conclusion of this video is right away. The system has flaws that go beyond polish or AI capabilities. Focusing just on the AI's ability to interface with the system will not fix those shortcomings. While much of the naval system is phenomenally designed and connects the economy and diplomacy to the naval game in a way that no other Paradox game could actually do, there are crucial issues that make it so that navies in Victoria 3 will not live up to the expectations unless these things are changed. To me, this is vital, because Victoria 3 legitimately did a pretty good job with the system, but it is only at the cusp of greatness. It isn't quite there. Originally, I wrote this video in a way where I went methodically over the good and bad elements of the naval system in great detail, basically a review. However, frankly, the most important things that I have to say are all on the negative side of the naval mechanics. The negative parts simply matter a lot more than the positive parts to make the system into a good one. To still include all the things that I did like about this update, so that the video isn't nearly as lopsided, because my opinion of this update certainly isn't, I will now give you a little bit of a speedrun there. I liked the Japan content as it was less convoluted than Austria, rich in options and a good storyline to teach especially new players the game. That content's worst enemy lies in the fact that outside powers rarely actively threaten Japan, which is of course a major plotline in Japan's history and the content that came with the DLC. But let's hope that they fix that in the upcoming AI update. I also like magnates and tiered interests, with the latter being a phenomenal, amazing feature on Victoria 3's way towards regional and limited conflicts. It is, in my opinion, the best regional diplomatic system yet for any Paradox title ever, and honestly by a massive margin. Say what you will, but diplomatic interest tiers and diplomatic treaties are something any other Paradox game should look at here in Victoria 3 very carefully to see what elements they can potentially steal. I also like many elements of the naval system itself. For example, the ship construction points as well as the modifications that you can make for your ship models are great. The modifications we have here are fortunately not a question of some min-maxing matter in which you just focus on what exactly the devs misbalanced this patch, but rather are a pretty straightforward expression of your own economic prowess, so how much ship cost can I actually afford as a country, and your strategic interests. Do you foresee needing to blockade your enemy, defend yourself against supply raids, or facilitate many naval invasions? You can purpose-build your navy. So, in short, the navies that we build here are based entirely on our economic gameplay and our own strategic vision. This puts the Victoria 3 shipbuilder mechanics somewhere between HOI 4 and any other regular game like Victoria 2 or EU 5 in its complexity. What's more, the way battles play out, while extremely opaque, is well done. You can prepare your navies to combat specific foes, and you have a clear distinction between boats made from wood and those made from metal. Now lastly, and honestly kind of least, supply is generally a nice idea. This mechanic means that you can flexibly change the focus of your navy, but are limited in what exactly you can deploy where. You could, for example, have the entire supply capacity in use to station a massive fleet all the way in East Asia, and if nothing, anywhere else. You could also alternatively have a nicely layered system of fleets all around the globe. This is a very nice flexible solution, really doing the Victorian naval strategies justice. The update all in all does a lot right when it comes to the feature implementation. Its design allows you to make strategic choices, deploy a navy as you anticipate threats, and fail if you plan poorly. Warfare, as things are designed, should remain primarily strategic and firmly attached to your economy, and whether you planned well or poorly in the grand scheme of things. That is how it should be, at least in theory. In practice, that is simply not the case. What you will encounter, and I will mention it again and again throughout this video, is that instead of having any of these interesting strategic choices, You really just have one really big fleet with which you beat the enemy and then win your war. This gives us an important question. Where did it go wrong? Why does a system with so many options and so much complexity end up dumbed down into something so basic? See, the problem here isn't with what is there, but rather with what isn't there. Because honestly, to me, in some ways, and I already feel a little bit agitated here, it really feels like they forgot to actually fully execute on their own design intentions. There are some essential issues with the system, and we need to talk about them because they have to be solved. Now, I'm saying all of this specifically as somebody that pitched his own system years ago, and because of it, had concrete ideas and expectations. This is not to say that my system was better or the only option, but that I have some ideas about what the issues were, what you needed to tackle, and what mechanically would make a system like this quite unsound. Because I had to think about them myself in my system as well. And so, I believe that I have identified several mechanical holes that need to be filled if this system ever wants to feel good and actually have players use all of the parts of the system. But before we even get to the mechanics here, we need to talk about something underpinning all of these issues. The user interface. Oh my god, man, what is going on? Did they just forget to make one? Okay, I want to be a little bit clearer regarding what I mean here, because I could just be ranting about it for several hours as well. The UI for example, the ship editor and even the general fleet window are okay, maybe even good. The problem with the UI, which, like I said, underpins nearly every issue the system currently faces, whether it is caused by bugs, poor design, or by a player being stupid, my apologies, is that it does everything it can to keep information hidden, making it unclear whether something is working or not altogether. And how can you use a system if you have no idea what your viable steps are? We are looking at a system that changed virtually everything about the way that you interact with the Navy, but a UI that barely changed altogether. For example, we can hunt pirates now. But where are pirates? Obviously, the game doesn't tell us, because that would be too convenient. In reverse, I can do piracy. But where is trade actually flowing? Where would be a good spot to be a pirate? Obviously, the game doesn't tell us because it would be too convenient. To see whether I have enough sailors for my navy, or whether replenishment of a ship is simply really slow, there's exactly one menu where I can see it. Did you know that some ship types can be too far from friendly ports and take damage? No, wait, that's not wrong. They don't take damage, apparently they just deal less damage. And which ships are we even talking about here? What's happening? Nobody knows. We see these massive UI issues in the most basic areas of the system, and really, even if this system was utterly flawless in design, you would have no way of telling outside of spending hours and hours testing missions, assignments, and everything that comes with them, to see how they interact with each other and what is going on in the first place. The terrible interface here does not just range from basic information reads of your own navy, of course, but continues through any information that pertains to your enemy that you might need to make genuinely strategic choices. Where are, for example, the fleets of somebody that I might declare war on? You can either check out the nation info screen and painstakingly hover over several layers of tooltips, or search every last C node manually. Or another thing, how efficient is a blockade going to be? I have to tediously unassign anything that a fleet is currently doing, and only then can I find out whether that fleet is sufficient or not. All of this is unbelievably annoying, and is one of those circumstances where, once again, Victoria 3 implements something fantastic, but even when it works, half the player base will rightfully be of the opinion that it doesn't. Because how could they know? I can give you a million examples of extremely basic things that I just can do and understand how they work at a glance in any other game, needing a really long time because I instead need to test it here. This is a great example. How do I best trap an enemy fleet in a port? Under which conditions is an enemy fleet actually trapped to begin with? Because, I mean, I wouldn't know. So it turns out blockades need a long time to build up, since your navy arrives and only then starts building up the value, unless I position them there before the war started. But even then, I can't actually keep them trapped, because during the diplo play, they can just sail past my navy. Fantastic. Can I maybe stop them from going anywhere, not with the blockade option, but with interception? Well, it's vague wording. Do I intercept navies passing through, or only those active with missions in these nodes? How would I know? Building up from this, what even is mission efficiency? What does it actually mean? What is the chance that I can get a fleet to fight me that is passing through a node my navy is operating in if I have, let's say, a mission efficiency of 50%? Is it 50%? Is it 50% times some value that I don't know about? Does it depend on if Mercury is in retrograde? Or can I ignore the firmament? Continuing from there even further, why would mission efficiency be split exclusively by how many C nodes I assign to a fleet? Surely, the actual size of the fleet should also play a role, right? A fleet of 100 ships surely can do a mission just as efficiently in 2 nodes as a fleet of 50 ships can do in 1. And while we're at it, in which nodes is the enemy active beyond the one their fleet is physically positioned in, because, well, they might be active in multiple ones? How much of my trade and supply flows through those nodes? How much actual damage are they doing? Should I be worried, or is this irrelevant and I can just ignore them? The UI here fails at even the most basic things. Have you ever, in any modern grand strategy game, ever encountered a situation where you send your military forces to do battle and you get no inclination, no indicator at all on whether they will lose or win the upcoming fight? Every last current game gives you an indicator. But hell, Victoria 3 is a little bit of a pioneer here. They aren't even doing that. The naval system delivers, sadly, absolutely nothing on the UX front. So many things that you can do here are fun, but you wouldn't know about them unless you really put in the time. You know, I very rarely dedicate this much focus to UI. Victoria 3 has also always been a beast of many tooltips, but the naval system's state of affairs is much worse than should be allowed, even if we give the game a lot of leeway, as we historically have done for grand strategy games. The naval systems UI fails to give you the most basic pieces of information that are necessary to do any function and interact with the system on any level whatsoever. Wherever the systems do actually function correctly, it takes a lot of deliberate testing to really understand it. There are no widgets on ocean tiles, you are not even coloring them in really, no clear visibility of where to expect the enemy and what to do. This means that a complex naval system, in essence, boils down to the player's strategy being largely independent of whatever the enemy that they are fighting is actually doing. If you have a fleet that is big enough to face the enemy on the ocean, you essentially do 2 things when going to war. For one, you execute whatever missions you had planned, be that blockading or naval invasions. Beyond that, you just post facto check where the enemy fleet went and then decide whether they are annoying enough for you to send the fleet to get the job done, or whether you just ignore it. This is true for every single war that you fight in the system, because any more complex decision-making processes, like taking out hostile naval bases that allow them to operate away from their shores, are entirely non-viable. The UI simply doesn't support it. And man, in this system you already can do such fun things with it. Here, for example, I both blockaded and port-bombarded both French mainland coastlines for months. The damage is, well, I mean, you can see it for yourself. It's extensive, it's fun, it's cool. And it was a pain to get going. When we take a closer look at it, we can see that I had to painstakingly assign enough ships to blockade both the Atlantic and the Mediterranean coast. Initially, I only did the Atlantic, because that is where France's world market access point was, which you can only see in a specific map mode, rather than always while navigating a navy that you want to blockade with. Yeah, okay, it's fantastic. When that point shifted to the south, I also had to move people to the Mediterranean, but of course I was never notified of this. Then I needed to assign just enough ships to port bombard in an efficient way and keep them there. The consequences are severe, but there is no direct statistic tracking it, and it is deeply finicky. I can't see how many trade routes I shut down unless I manually look at before and after, and man, look at that, I did take a lot of trade routes away, which is super cool. And despite all of this success in my operation, despite my total naval supremacy, I still decided to ignore the French remaining navy because, well, they're raiding my supply lines and I just really don't care. This was finicky enough. I don't, on top of that, need to play cat and mouse with their navy as well. If we had any kind of interface here, frankly, the French might stash the navy in a port to draw most of my fleet for a blockade of that specific port, making a total blockade of their entire country otherwise impossible, because now they have concentrated forces and... Look, even if we had interface to allow this, that part even then isn't really possible currently because I can't have an instantly effective blockade against France at the start of the war, which means their ships blissfully sail past me during the diplo play whenever they want. The UI here sucks. It directly sabotages what the system itself could theoretically do. All the width, all the breadth that we have in the system that gives us all these interesting choices in the ship editor, how we build a navy, where we position it, none of that matters, because the UI makes every feature that exists a pain to work with. All you really end up doing is have one big navy beat their big navy and then just blockade or something, I don't know. So, I hope that you see my point here. The UI already is truly horrendous. It hides most of the features that work and makes it impossible to tell which actually do. However, as tough as I am on the usability of the existing systems, it's not much compared to how I feel about the topic that follows. The supply system completely fails to achieve its task of creating naval theaters and naval warfare that is meaningful in any way whatsoever. So let's leave the UI and let's leave the frustration with the UI behind, because this right here is even more severe and much more important than any UI problem ever could be. The supply system that I mentioned previously already puts in all the groundwork for complex naval planning. You can shuffle your fleets around and plan exactly in which parts of the world you want your navy to be positioned in. Theoretically, this is the perfect framework to allow for varied strategies, making strategic choices the deciding factor in naval warfare over small micro-adjustments during the war itself. Committing a navy to cover the whole world or to be concentrated in just one part of your empire should be a compelling choice. It should define how you fare in future conflicts. But, due to two major issues, this is not what happens in any way whatsoever. Let's start by discussing the skeleton of the system: supply ships. Supply ships are built by your otherwise unused naval construction points, and then, of course, are also passively maintained by them. This is meant to create a situation in which you still get use out of your shipbuilding construction points even when you aren't actively building any ships. Instead, you are building supply ships, which give you freedom of operation, because the more you have, of course, the less limited are you in where you can deploy your fleet. The issues here are clear. If you've built a navy that is to your satisfaction, you simply pump everything into supply ships, and, as there really is only a very soft cap based on how many construction points are occupied by maintenance, and whether you can afford that maintenance, you can build a massive reservoir of supply ships. You simply build them and put them into your pocket dimension. You can do that to the point at which whatever the enemy does becomes meaningless, even without you directly opposing them. You can easily ignore any raiding fleets because you simply outbuild any limitation this feature may have ever had on you. Hell, even if you aren't overbuilding massively, the enemy can't tell how your supply is really doing in the first place, because there is no way to see enemy supply ships' capacity and usage. What's more, and just so you know, the AI doesn't do this at all currently, you can also massively save on supply ships by changing a fleet's home HQ to be close to its location of operation. That is, of course, fantastic and realistic in theory, but in practice, it means several things. For one, your new home HQ doesn't have any kind of supply throughput limitation. An understaffed Hong Kong Naval Logistics Center can supply a massive fleet with very few supply ships without any problems, the same way that a well-staffed building back on the Isles could, but with a lot more supply ships. That obviously doesn't make any sense, because logistics are a very complex beast for a navy like this one. Ship repairs, all of that stuff that just happens on deployment, none of that is factored in. Secondly, as you can't tell where an enemy fleet is getting supplies from, outside of tedious clicking at individual formations and hovering over their supply, you can't even target enemy logistics centers with pinpoint accuracy. This means that even if supply ship limits were somewhere within the realms of balance, and if we did actually utilize overseas HQs, it's not like the game gives you the tools to approach it in any meaningful fashion either. The entire supply system's premise of giving you a complex choice of where you want your fleet stationed and how you maintain them there crumbles under the way the game actually plays. One must wonder why Britain never simply built such a massive stockpile of supply ships that the submarine raiding by the German Navy in World War I and II simply wasn't of any concern. Who cares about 4,000 sunk supply convoys if I have 40,000 in the bank and only actually need 15,000? There could be some real strategic choices here. How many supply ships can any Victorian-era nation actually create and maintain, purely from a logistical point of view? How can I impact that limit? For example, by building certain buildings that maintain a higher limit. What about requisitioning merchant ships, as was done most of the time in virtually every war, if I ever hit a time of crisis where my regular supply convoys have been sunk? This way, I could keep my navy operating for just a little bit longer, with the downside of course being that trade slows down. To summarize this, using supply ships so an absolute value rather than just a percentage network is not really the problem, but the loose limits set only by maintenance construction costs as well as how it functions when you station a fleet overseas with a new home HQ is. With the way endgame economies scale, the entire mechanic becomes meaningless. After all, you can simply create these supply ships and store them in the void forever. The strategic layer of choice we would have here if the system had a ceiling mechanic integrated is sadly lost in its entirety with the way it currently functions. Now, I don't even want to mention here the series of bugs that exist for this feature as well, surrounding assigning, for example, new home HQs, and that wiping out all supply ships assigned to a navy, leading to the navy just losing all organization and needing to recover for months, if not even years. These are bugs, they have to be fixed of course, but they aren't design issues. So I hope that you already see the first issue right here with supply ships. They are a meaningless metric, they do not have any meaningful top capacity, and of course they are also too loose a system. The way the supply system is implemented and actually functions currently means that it is quasi-meaningless, which means your navy can be anywhere at any given point in time, taking away a lot of the strategic layer. There's a second and yet more severe issue with the mechanics here of the supply and mission system. I call this problem naval stickiness. Stickiness is a topic that I spent a lot of time thinking about when I was trying to come up with my own naval system, and I consider it to be unbelievably important. Alfred Thayer Mahan, a legendary US naval theoretician, asserted that the job of any navy is very clear. Its goal was to secure command of the sea against her nation's enemies. Or, if that was not possible, it should at least deny the enemy the ability to use the oceans as much as it could, so either take full control of it or deny the enemy to use it. In Victoria 3, this is what it comes down to. You cannot facilitate any of this, because supply enables both you and your enemy to be wherever you want to be no matter what. Let's play this out with a real-world example. Let's say that I, the United States of America, plan to survive a war against the British. Well, official war plans devised by none other than the amazing Alfred Thayer Mahan went something like this. We will keep a big navy in New York. This way, the British must either commit their major force to watch the harbor, allowing us to trade with the rest of the world through other harbors, or they spread out their forces to achieve a full continental blockade. In that case, our navy will break out of the New York harbor, hurry to the Canadian east coast, and blow every last coaling station and port to smithereens, rendering any operation the British could bring against us in the West Atlantic Ocean impossible. The thinking and goal here were clear. The Americans had a clear understanding from where the British were operating and what the British plan realistically would be, long before any war broke out. I mean, this was a theoretical war plan that never came to fruition because the two sides never went to war. But there was some certainty because, like I said, the purpose of the navy is to either dominate the seas or to deny the enemy the ability to use them. This meant that both sides, British and American, had certain things that they could realistically consider in their plans because they knew some things about what the enemy might do. How does that play out in Victoria 3? Can we deny the British activity in the Western Atlantic all the same, or can't we? Well, really, it's simple. Even if you were to change the home HQ or fleet to a state that then gets blockaded or occupied, so in this case, the Americans blowing up the ports in Canada, in-game you would have to change the HQ. But that fleet, no matter what, can operate worldwide with the same level of efficiency that it could beforehand, as long as you have enough supply ships. Unless we also cut down your supply ships drastically through prolonged military engagements, me burning the entire country of Canada to the ground does nothing to your ability to operate in the West Atlantic. The British can just keep showing up. The naval system in Victoria 3 being entirely supply-based means that I can change my entire fleet positioning worldwide in a heartbeat. In the game, I don't actually need to commit to anything at all. I can easily shift all of my ships from, just spitballing here, St. Petersburg to the Sea of Japan, and they would operate at the same level of quality, with the same know-how and the same ability to fight as a fleet stationed there for decades that knows the waters very well. My enemy cannot have any expectation of my regional forces at any point. All it takes for me to show up in full strength is to slightly shift where I am using my supply ships and rock up with my full fleet. In fact, we see the AI doing this constantly. Fleets somewhere in East Asia get assigned in Europe to transport troops to America before being assigned to patrol the coast of Brazil before they're being sent back to Asia. There's no rhyme or reason behind what the AI does, because fleets aren't actually committed to any region to any degree. There is no naval stickiness to naval deployments. That navy that I just stationed in Qingdao, if I have a conflict somewhere else, can show up there, and all it costs me is time. The issues that arise from the fact that we have no level of naval stickiness are massive. I can't plan for anything in any war. Warfare in Victoria 3, much like the game's diplomatic systems, is meant to be one thing and one thing only: strategic. I meant to win and lose wars on the drawing board. The actual gameplay is primarily my plans competing with my enemy's plans. But with the way things are, I cannot assume to any degree that I may only face, for example, a smaller East Asian fleet at first in the German colonies in the region, that I may defeat them, devastate local port facilities, cutting down on any efficiency a new fleet may have, and then face a weakened, disoriented, and dreadfully hopeless main battle fleet that arrives months and months later. With supply, the main battle fleet could arrive with perfect efficiency whenever it wants. It isn't even required or encouraged for Germany to deposit a regional fleet to begin with. Bringing the entire main battle fleet of Germany over to Asia doesn't abandon any important expertise or commitments that fleet may have had elsewhere when it moves from its port in Europe to East Asia. Because again, with supply being the only limiting factor in fleet deployment, any fleet can do anything anywhere at any time. All you're really paying in are a couple of weeks or months of transit. We have all of these fantastic systems in which I can have different types of fleets to counter detachments and so on. But in the end, everything in Victoria 3's naval system, because of supply, boils down to this. My massive fleet fights your massive fleet, and whoever paid more for it wins. There are no small skirmishes, no regional detachments. There is no option to bind the enemy's main battle fleet that is stronger than mine simply by sitting in a port that they must now blockade, or risk that I can break out and wreak havoc whenever I want. There is no small detachment on the other side of the world that I want to keep there, even if it means that my ongoing war somewhere else becomes riskier, because having a fleet committed in that region would still give me advantages if any regional war were to break out there. What a system lacks is a mechanic that makes regional deployments meaningful, that adds naval stickiness. If I have a station in a particular region, that station should carry expertise for its region. It should make tasks more efficient, and it should mean that, within the immediate range of its station, it could execute what you want from it much better than a fleet making a long road trip. This is the missing component without which the AI will never be good, and the system will always have amazing options that all amount to nothing, as at the end of the day, it's always going to be Big Navy 1 against Big Navy 2. Only if we had such a limiting mechanic that works in parallel with supply ships can we devastate ports in which navies are based to impact the enemy's efficiency and throw a wrench into any operability bonuses the enemy may otherwise enjoy. As the system is currently, it is completely useless at achieving its own design goals. But okay, I have been trash-talking the game for a good while now, and while I do think that that is justified, let's get constructive, because that's the most fun about these kind of videos. Victoria 3's latest patch actually does a lot of things right, and mechanically, it doesn't need mountains moved to make the system more than what it currently is. Here are my ideas, and I would like to hear about them from your end as well, so make sure to leave a comment. To achieve stickiness and to embed it into any future mechanics that allow purely regional conflicts, it needs two more primary mechanics. It needs a station naval range and intel. Let's talk about the naval range. I suggested this back in my naval warfare theory video as well. Some missions, especially those of a hostile nature, should require range limitations attached to them. These should likely scale with the technology and potentially the doctrine of a country's navy. So early fleets would only be able to execute missions such as blockades with 100% efficiency within 1 or 2 sea nodes of their station port, whereas later fleets could go as far as, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 or 7 sea nodes. The exact limits are obviously a topic for concrete balancing, not really theory crafting. Beyond those sea node limits, mission efficiency, battle readiness, and so on should drastically fall. This means that these missions aren't impossible to execute, but they certainly would be a lot harder. This means that a Prussian navy can still, for example, go on an interest establishment region in East Asia, as it did historically, but it would be much worse at it than a regionally stationed fleet that belongs to the British or the French. These naval ranges should largely be driven by the technology and modifications of ships in a fleet, but the state in which you station them should also have a proper purpose as well. Historically, finding a good location, fortifying it, and building port facilities is the only way to A. Safeguard a harbor from invasion, and, of course, B. Supplying all the station ships in the first place. We can keep it very simple here. We already have a system for naval fortifications that block invasions unless the enemy does it with a big enough fleet. Historically, the Germans decided against committing to the so-called Kreuzerkrieg because their worldwide naval bases were able to be reached by land by the British. Had they been locked off and equipped with enough fortification towards the ocean, they may actually have tried this strategy because their ports would have been defensible. Simultaneously, any state in which you station a fleet should have limits to how many ships or how much supply they can actually support. This then should be something that you can upgrade as you go as well. Say, for example, I take Qingdao. It's a good port, so it can naturally support a higher number of fortifications than is normal, meaning that only a relatively big fleet could actively invade this port. Additionally, I begin investing in actual port infrastructure, which ups the limits of ships that can be adequately supplied in this state from 10 to 20, or maybe even 30 or 40, depending on how much I'm willing to invest. Once I station a fleet in this state, the fleet also should gain efficiency in all missions, or at least selected hostile missions, in this region. This efficiency should gradually be gained over time and lost if I stop having a reasonable sized station there. This way, I am pushed towards strategically building up harbors, choosing them wisely and committing navies to certain locations. In the worst case scenario, if I need to pull my entire station from that region, I make a strategically significant choice here, whereby I sacrifice my future efficiency in the region for gains in other regions or during a current war. This is literally, by the way, what Britain did when it was preparing for World War I. Slowly but surely, they were pulling ships out of stations all over the world and into their station in Scapa Flow. This was done so that they would be adequately prepared to fight the German Navy in the North Sea. Now what's more, I could theoretically still bring my main battle fleet to Qingdao if need be, but lacking the local experience modifier, it is riskier and may well end in full defeat, or at least a black eye, unless I totally outclass my enemy still. This means main battle fleet deployments away from its home region will be viable, but riskier. I would be better advised to simply reinforce my regional presence or avoid conflict in that region altogether by building strong alliances. Yet again, it is literally what Britain did with Japan. They didn't have the capacity to limit the Russians in the region, so instead they formed an alliance with the Japanese. The consequence of these changes to essentially what is effective mission naval range mean that supply ships are still meaningful. Navies still require them, and there is a global limit to what deployments my supply network can support. But once we then enter into regions, taking local ports, building them up and deploying fleets in them long-term is the way to become a global hegemon. Not simply ferrying your main battle fleet across the world whenever needed, which is the current gameplay. In my opinion, everything I've mentioned is the bare minimum. Currently, the naval system has everything it needs for success, but the lack of naval range and stickiness-inducing mechanics makes it so that, in the end, none of that matters. That needs to change. Now atop that system, however, I also believe that we need an intel system. It can be incredibly basic and rudimentary, but it would be best if it was there. Here's what I mean. Similar to how you get better at missions if a fleet has been stationed in a region for a while, it should also get more competent at providing information about enemy fleets in number, size, and quality. I imagine something very basic here, maybe 3 levels. One that lets you know there is an enemy fleet in a set of nodes or in a port, a second that gives you a rough estimate of their strength, and finally, of course, a third one that gives you all the information that you can possibly get here. Ship types, commanders, and so on. What this does is simple. For one, it encourages once more having regional stations manned and equipped, so that they can even give you information on what your enemy is doing in the first place. Secondly, this means that you get some certainty about where your enemy is, what they are doing, and why they're doing it. And to turn it around, they can make plans about you. At any moment, you should be allowed to get a map mode that shows a country's presence as far as you know. When you see that, for example, the British have been shifting vessels into their main battle fleet in Scapa Flow and there is a huge navy waiting there for you, you know that they are preparing for war against you, Germany, by getting a fleet ready that can easily contain your Hochseeflotte. Whether you can do something about this information, well, who knows, but it gives you some information that is vital if we want an interesting strategic choice when it comes to the Navy. If you, on the other hand, however, neglect intel collection, you get bare minimum evaluations. Yeah, boss, medium fleet over there, we think. This would mean that Navy commitments in the same node against an enemy become a lot more predictable. After all, you now know where the enemy has fleets with efficiency bonuses, but also riskier, as you may not always be able to tell exactly what you will be facing. This intel system, to keep it extremely simple, can work with an extremely basic mechanical approach. A station fleet might build up regional knowledge that goes as far as its maximum effective node range. The more detection it has, the better does it function in this role. It builds it up, and the value remains at the maximum that fleet can reach in those nodes. If you move your fleet away or reduce in size or lose an ally that was also sharing intel with you, the value goes down accordingly. If we combine the naval range limitations with an intel system, suddenly regional stickiness becomes a major factor. Your wars are decided based on how well you stationed your fleets in preparation for the conflicts you anticipated, and the enemy can make proper plans around whether they can face you right now or whether they can't, how they need to shift around their fleets to, for example, take out your overseas naval bases and stations. Instead of every war being Big Fleet 1 against Big Fleet 2, becomes a contest between how well each side positioned themselves and what they're willing to risk when push comes to shove. This would mean that different ship types, different fleet setups, and different naval strategies finally actually become something worthwhile considering. They're all in the game, but they're just not really a factor right now. Without a system that introduces this kind of naval stickiness, we will never ever have a functioning Victoria 3 naval system that goes beyond extremely basic and extremely tedious fleet hopping throughout the world. Alright, and that's honestly all from me. There are other factors here, like for example that I would like to see, after all, being able to build ships for other nations with promised contracts. So you promise them to build it, they give you money, and in 5 or 10 years you have to deliver, or otherwise your contract goes void and you no longer have a good reputation. That would be cool, but honestly, it would be bloat for this video, because it's not what is needed to make this system as interesting as it deserves to be. Folks, this was my video on why I think things are going wrong with the naval system, but why we are so close to greatness. Go argue in the comments, link the Victoria 3 team this video on your favorite social media, and well, love ya. I'll see you later. Alligator.